Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the City of Canning. It's great to see you all here today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tanya Trengrove and I'm the Director of Community Development here at the City of Canning. Thank you for coming along today. And before we begin the formal presentation, I'd just like to do a few housekeeping duties. So if there's an emergency, and hopefully there won't be, we've got an exit door to my left and your right, and just outside the doors where you came in, there's a door that goes out into the front car park. Please walk in an orderly fashion. I normally say run like hell, but I thought I didn't say that today, but I did anyway. Restrooms are over to my right, just out the double doors there, or you can access them out through those doors and turn right and up the corridor. And we're going to have Lisa tea and coffee at the end of the presentation, and Vicky, that would be lovely. Okay, we'll start my little presentation. Sorry, did someone ask for wine? Yes? Sorry about that. Okay, so just a little bit of, background about the Care and Disability Services Review. In November 2015, Answers Strategic were engaged by the City to undertake a full review of those two areas. The objective of the independent review was to present a factual overview of the City's aged care and disability services, whilst also investigating the changes in the care industry in Australia. And also to report on how the care services industry funding arrangements and the changing preferences of consumers will affect the City's ability to be able to deliver those services both now and into the future. So they're making some big changes. The focus has always been on ensuring that our community will continue to receive the best possible and high quality services over the coming decades. I was pressing the wrong button. So the services included in the Aged Care and Disability Review are all those. So we didn't have that on our presentation on Monday, so we've popped that in just so that you know that the review is inclusive of all these service types. So we've got Canning Lodge, our residential aged care accommodation, our retirement living, Wilson and Rossmore retirement villages, our independent living units at Caprice Place, and we have 2 community houses. Our home and community care, so I think currently we receive approximately $6 million in that area for services including domestic and home and garden maintenance, and there's lots of other different services. I think there's about 10 service types in the HAC area. Our home care packages, of which we have 125, our Meals on Wheels, all our transport services, we have a community visiting service. We have 3 day centres, we have a regional assessment service, and in our disability services area we have family respite, supported accommodation and a school holiday program. Lisa, I'm having a problem with this. Can you actually do it from there?
Yep.
And the next one? There we go. So at the council meeting on the 26th of April, the council officially received a report, and that was the endorsement that they made, that the City to engage with the community in regards to the findings of the review that was undertaken. It's important to note that there's no decision that's been made yet. The council will be involved in all the engagement activities to gain as much information as possible before they make a decision. Proposed timeline, so we had a staff and volunteer meeting on Monday over at Riverton Leisureplex. Today is our first community briefing, and thank you very much for coming along. And again on the 21st of May, which is Saturday, here in this same room at 11 o'clock, we'll hold another community briefing. Feedback, and I'll talk to you about that at the end of the presentation. Feedback will be received up until 4 p.m. on the 17th of June, and I'll talk about the ways you can give us feedback. And we're hoping to put a report to a special council meeting probably towards the end of July, and that will be inclusive of all the feedback and recommendations for the council to make an informed decision. This is our commitment. Client care and wellbeing is the City's primary concern. The City will continue to ensure the best possible care for all our clients and residents. Okay, I'd just like to introduce you to we have a little project team working on this project. I'm the project sponsor. I'd like to introduce you to Diana Lamazia, who started with us on Friday. Where's Diana? Diana, if you'd like to stand up. Diana's our HR project specialist, so welcome, Diana. We have our human resource business partner, Justine Luckens, who's employed by the city and works in the community development area, looking after approximately 800 staff and does a wonderful job. We have Lisa Bradley, our Manager of Marketing and Comms here at the City, so she's put all the communications plan together for this project. And we have Diana Sinet, who's our Project Administrator. There she is in the front. So that's the team, everybody. Okay, so in terms of questions, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentation. And we'll have some roving mics for you, and we will ask you to state your name before you actually ask the question. And we're actually videoing this, so that lovely gentleman over there is doing the videoing the briefing. It will be filmed and uploaded on the city's website for those people that are unable to make the forum. And we're also, we've had a couple of phone calls from Monday where people have actually said that they can't attend and how can they get a copy of the presentation, and we're more than happy to send that out in the mail if we're required to. That's not a problem. So it gives me great pleasure now to introduce you to Cam Ansell from Ansell Strategic, and he'll go through the findings of the review. Please welcome him.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Tanya, and great to have the opportunity to talk to you today. I held up proceedings a little bit today. I took a left on Canning Highway instead of Manning Road for about the 10th time, so apologies for slowing things down a little bit. Today I have... Sorry, Lisa.
Yep.
There we go. Today I was going to talk through a quick introduction on who we are. Tanya's spoken about the project scope. I just wanted to summarise it a little bit to give a little bit more background to the work that we've done. I wanted to give you an overview of what's happening in the industry at the moment around services for older people and in retirement living and disability, and then talk to you about our observations and our findings about what we found within the city services. That then gives us an opportunity to talk about what needs to be done and what can be done in order to make sure that the city fulfills its objective to provide the best possible services in the city. Okay, firstly just about us, I think you've got the summary there. Ansell Strategic is basically a firm of nurses and accountants, and our job is to help providers of aged care and retirement living services to improve the way that they deliver services and make sure that they stay around in the long term. So most of our work is in Australia and New Zealand and a little bit in Asia as that area emerges. So that's our background and why we were asked to come and help with this project. The scope, as Tanya said, had three primary components. The first one was to do a review of the aged care, retirement living and disability services. And second was to, having had a look at the services, to think about all the changes that are taking place in Australia at the moment in the reform process we're about to talk about. And then to come up with some options and some alternative courses of action for the council to decide upon to try and make sure that the services are not only kept, but they're expanded along with a larger number of people looking for the services. The first one is an overlook of the industry, and you'll have seen different versions of this graph. What it's showing is the number of older people coming through in Australia and the number of older people that are coming through in the future. We have a rapidly ageing population. In the 1930s, the number of children that were born over the next couple of decades increased substantially, and then even more after the Second World War. And what has happened is we have a large number of people that are coming through around about the same time and over the next 20 years. And what it tends to do is it puts a lot of emphasis on making sure that we can deliver services for the many more people that are going to require services. what it also does is that group of people have much higher expectations for high quality services, and making sure that not just the availability of the service is there, but the services that are provided are relevant to the needs of the people that will receive them in the future. On the positive side as well is that it's also encouraged a lot of people to want to move into the aged care and retirement living sectors, to really focus on this as an area for investment. In Australia, most of those organisations are not-for-profit organisations. They're charitable groups, large charitable organisations, and their sole purpose is to provide the best quality services that they can to older people. This one you probably need to, if you've got eyesight like mine, you'll need to refer to your handouts. But basically what it's showing is the changing ownership of these services across the country. As I said, most of the aged care retirement living services in Australia are operated by private operators. They're generally charitable organisations, and we're seeing investment from for-profit private sector operators as well. Local government and state government used to have a big role in providing aged care services historically, but since these groups have emerged and the funding systems have improved, a lot of it has been moved into the private sector. The government has had to respond to these changes. We have a system where there are a fewer number of taxpayers to provide a greater number of consumers. And what the government did in 2012 was introduce a series of reforms. They are changes in the way that we provide services, and fundamentally what these services do is that they seek to make better efficiency in the way services are delivered. So rather than giving big blocks of funding, they're providing individual budgets for the people who use the services, and unfortunately we're being asked to pay for more of those services ourselves. Historically, when there were a fewer number of older people requiring the support, we could afford to have it more taxpayer funded. Increasingly, that's going to have to be paid by us as we use those services moving forward. So there's been a major change in the way services are to be delivered, and the biggest changes take place in February next year, where we move from a situation where the government controls supply to releasing that supply so that consumers can access the services they want from the people that they want to deliver those services. Retirement living and disability as well. In your handouts there's a brief summary of some of the changes there, but they are very consistent. We're moving into an environment where we have much more focus on the individual. The individual is also more responsible for choosing the people who provide those services. Next slide, please. And the next one. And that makes it very, very competitive. And so lots of aged care providers in Western Australia at the moment looking to get as big as they possibly can. If they can achieve that scale, they'll be able to sustain themselves much longer and provide better services to the people within those areas. One of the big challenges that is changing as well, that will be a big impact on the City of Canning's management, is that we will have budgets going with individuals. Rather than providing the money in big blocks, the budgets for home care services will go with the individual, and that means major changes to the way that we operate and the way that we manage our systems. So that's one of the challenges that is facing the future. The second big challenge for the city is it's getting really, really competitive. Lots of organisations that haven't been in aged care before are coming into aged care, and they will be fighting for services as much as they can in the years to come. Tanya spoke about the services that are provided for older people and the disabled in the Canning area, and we're going to get a chance to talk about Canning Lodge, 42-bed aged care facility, a nursing home. We've got the aged care persons accommodation, which is the retirement villages, two relatively small but very tidy retirement villages with about 54 units in those 2 villages. We have quite a substantial HAC program, home and community care, delivery of services to people in their homes, and programs operated out of the care centres. And then we have disability services, which are largely around accommodation type services for people with disability. So we've spent the time analysing all of those services. And firstly, just having a look at Canning Lodge. Canning Lodge is a beautiful facility, originally built in a hostel format for people with lower levels of care needs. It's been really well maintained, and it has a lovely home-like environment. It's enjoyed happy staff and happy residents and families. And the way that the services have been delivered and the feedback that has been provided shows how very important it is to be able to have an aged care home like this in the area. The home was built, as I mentioned, for people with lower levels of care needs. It does make it challenging for people who have higher levels of care needs. And basically what's happening in Australia is, as we get better at looking after people in their homes, they generally either don't go into a nursing home, or if they do go into a nursing home, it tends to be at a high level of care need. The challenge that we've got with Canning Lodge is it's not really built for people with higher levels of care need. And so one of the challenges in the future is for investment to be made to make sure that it is modified and changed in such a way, not only that it can provide needs to people with higher care needs, but also at 42 beds it's relatively small, and to get the scale and the ability to be able to provide services to many more people, it needs to be expanded, which is quite good news on that site, because there's a bit of space to be able to do it. So lovely home, not built for the future. Retirement villages. The retirement villages are also very nicely maintained. They're in fantastic areas. The building stock is not consistent with the sorts of buildings that we build today. Retirement village units would tend to be larger. There'll be access ways and pathways that are probably a little bit easier for people to navigate. They are very small, and because they are very small and because they're old, they don't have a lot of scale. They're expensive to operate, and there will be potential for those sites in the future to perhaps increase the number of units that are provided there, again, to make it better prepared to look after a larger number of people that would like to get those services. The other thing that we tend to find too with retirement living today is to help people to stay at home as long as possible. If people want to age in the retirement village and stay in the retirement village, we'd also look to have support services on that site to make sure that the people are able to get people to come and provide assistance with anything that they want, whether that be around catering around food or just help with keeping the place instead. The next one was around the community care services and home care packages. This is probably the largest area that the City of Canning operates. The feedback from the users of those services has been positive. Also the feedback from volunteers and the staff that work in these areas, providing services to people to remain at home, remain healthy and happy at home, and operating the community centres, running activities and respite services. This is probably also the one area that is going to change the most over not just the coming years but the coming months. As I mentioned, much more competition for home care services. Home care services, in my opinion, is really the future of aged care. People ordinarily want to receive their services in their home, and as a result it's becoming very, very competitive. And the government is changing the way that it's funded so that it is the consumer, it's the customer that makes more of the decisions. And from February next year, the customer is going to be able to choose whatever provider they want to provide. Up until now, the government's decided who was allowed to provide the home care services, and the customer would be with that provider. That's going to change now, so it is the customer that can choose the provider that best meets their needs. If Canning is to continue these services, it needs to be responsive to those needs and competitive. The other thing that customers tend to look at really closely as well is how much it costs. You have to provide them individual budgets and show them how much it's costing, and that'll be another area that will be competitive moving forward. Finally, disability services. I mentioned 6 sites around the area, high client and staff satisfaction. The breadth of services, the amount of different services is somewhat limited. It's mainly around accommodation, but there will be scope to be able to provide more services in the future, and the government will expect that people are able to provide more services for the future. So we've found a recommendation to explore broader service offerings. So that was the appraisal. Basically speaking, we found that the aged care services and accommodation to be of good quality. We've found generally that the customers are happy with it and the staff are happy to work here. But we have also found that in retirement living and the aged care facility, the nursing home, is going to be in need of major change in order to make it current moving forward. And the home care services are going to need to be restructured to be competitive and survive in the longer term. And within that context and the Council's main priority that the services in the area not only remain but get better and expand to meet more older people in the area, we've come up with 3 options to consider. I'll go through them in detail, but firstly, the first option is to restructure and redevelop. That means within the City of Canning to review the services, rebuild, expand, and improve the management systems so that the home care services can be delivered competitively and differently than they are now to meet a brave new world. The second option is to look to provide other organisations to run the retirement villages and the nursing homes, and for them to undertake the modifications and expansions over the coming decades to expand them and improve them, and to use those funds to reinvest in home care services and disability. And the third one is to expand and rejuvenate all of the services in partnership with a professional organisation that is established to deliver those services, most likely one of the large religious and charitable organisations that would work in partnership to make the services stronger. So I'll just talk about them and maybe just touch on some of the impacts that these different decisions might make moving forward. The first is for Canning to internally redevelop and restructure the services. What that would mean is that over the coming decades, the retirement villages and nursing home services would need to be modified to meet the changing market. That would mean that they would need to ideally be larger so that more people can be accommodated in the services. A redevelopment of that, particularly given that the nursing home and the villages are decades old now, the investment in that will be quite substantial. It's likely to cost tens of millions of dollars. And then at the same time, the home care services, the HAC and the package services would also, that whole area would need to be restructured. It would need to be changed to make it more competitive and more responsive to the needs of consumers in the future, and also changing the internal systems to make sure that it can run to the new way that the government will fund from next year. So that's the internal modification. Some of the potential impacts in this is that it will take a lot of work to do, and that work has to be done very quickly, given a lot of the changes commence from February next year. It's going to mean a change to management, a change to the way that the systems operate, and there is a potential that this could see some disruption in service delivery. Most organisations that are providing home care services are going to run into disruption because nearly all organisations are built to the current funding models. The potential negative on this is that after undertaking this work and significant investment, there is a chance that with all of that done, the services and systems may still not be competitive in the new era, and it could be that other organisations move in to take up more of the demand, in which case it could be that the City of Canning services would reduce in size and scale. If a redevelopment and restructure could be done, and if the money could be found to undertake the redevelopment of the physical infrastructure of the buildings, then it could bring them up to a modern standard, and that would mean that future generations of consumers would have access to the sorts of services, accommodation that they'll need, and services in the future. The second option was to look to address the most expensive part of the challenge, which is the redevelopment of the villages and the nursing home at some point in the future, and to look to another organisation to acquire those assets, to run them, and to bring them up to modern standards. What that would do is that the money received from the transfer of those assets would then be invested in improving home care and disability services, and those services could be improved and rejuvenated. Again, there is the risk that the improvements don't meet the standards moving forward, but it would create an opportunity to reinvest in that focus area. And it may create the opportunity then, if it's competitive, to be able to expand those services. And the city enjoys a good reputation in the area, and so using that brand and that reputation could help for the expansion of the services. The final option was to move towards a strategic rejuvenation, improvement and expansion of all of the aged care and disability services, and to do that in partnership with an organisation that was created for that purpose. And so in Western Australia, most of the aged care providers are not-for-profit organisations, religious and charitable organisations, and their sole role and responsibility is to run aged care services and retirement accommodation. If the city was to partner with a group like this, it would be a matter of understanding who would be responsible for operating what assets. The city would retain ownership in normal circumstances of some of the assets, and the new organisation would share responsibility for the management of the services moving forward. Some of the impacts that might come with this on the wider community and the users of the services, again, like if it was to be done internally, there is a potential disruption. The disruption under this model is usually different. It's usually around the change in the management styles and the processes that comes with working with a big provider. Because most of the big providers are already near ready for 2017, it's unlikely to be a disruption in the delivery of the service itself so much as a change in the way that the organisation's management systems run. It does create the potential to provide an expansion of the services, particularly if the organisation already has a good footprint and already provides good services across the metro area and particularly around the Canning area. The partner organisation would then take the primary responsibility moving forward for delivering those services. And because these organisations are created just for providing aged care, retirement living services, you end up, I guess, with a pure focus on the delivery and the expansion of those services in the area. So those are basically the three options. To recap very quickly, for the city to try and address the big challenges ahead, fixing its infrastructure and its services to make it appropriate for the future internally. Secondly, to look at focusing those efforts on the home care services. And the third one is partnering with a large organisation, which would involve and include the transfer of operations to that new provider for the delivery of services in the future.
Thank you very much, Cam. So just before we hand over for any questions that you may have, I'd just like to acknowledge some of our elected members that are here today. So our Mayor, Paul Ing, is in the crowd. Mr Mayor, if you'd like to give us a wave. And sitting next to him is Margaret Hall. Welcome. Up the front we've got Councillor David Brown. Welcome, Councillor Brown. And to my left here we've got Councillor Ben Hunza. So, questions. We've got some roving mics. When asking you questions, please state your name and address prior to asking. We'll start with Mr Gleeson in the front there. Thank you, Mr Gleeson.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Bill Gleeson. I live in 107 Medillion Avenue, Riverton. I have an interest in this because, one, I'm a citizen of Canning, and two, I may have to be placed in one of these facilities somewhere down the track. My first question is to the presenter. Could you really expand on the first paragraph of the letter that was sent out by the City of Canning, which reads, and you have mentioned it, you may be aware of the Commonwealth and State planning to change the funding arrangements for aged care disability services, which allows consumers to direct their funding dollars. Could you really put that in simple words?
Yep.
But I haven't finished my questions. You can do that first, thank you.
Sure. Okay. So historically what has happened is on two levels. First, the government will generally provide a bucket of money, and then the provider of those services will use that bucket of money to be able to provide services for people in their homes. Basically what's happened is over time the government has found that not to be the most efficient way of providing the services, because you've got this big bucket and there's potential for it not to be used efficiently. So what they're doing is they're providing the individual consumers with an allocated budget. So what happens then is that individual consumer then can choose the provider that they want, and that operator then will access that money and deliver the services. What makes it so challenging is that it was much easier when they just gave us a bucket of money and you can just sort of draw on it. It makes it much harder and much more competitive when the consumers can choose who they want to deliver the services. And so that's probably the biggest fundamental change, and it starts to change from February next year.
Thank you. My second question is it your view that somewhere down the future that the City of Canning will have to redevelop the retirement villages, i.e. like Rothorpe and Swan Cottage have done in the last 10 years? And who will bear the cost of that? Will it be the City of Canning ratepayers, which will cost millions and millions of dollars, or will it be to the Mayor and councillors the view, which they probably won't give me now, that somewhere down the track it could go to private enterprise? Does Ansell have an interest in this, as well as providing the service you're doing now?
Yes, so we have no interest in it, and it'll be the council's decision as to which way it goes. But the answer to the first part of your question is yes. There's no question that the retirement village and the nursing home will need to be redeveloped. It's already quite difficult to market the units in the retirement village, even though they're in lovely locations. They're not built to current standard. It's going to be hard to get people to use them, and it costs a lot of money to run a village that's not meeting consumer expectations. In my opinion, it would be much better to have a nice modern village that looked after more people. So yes.
I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gleeson. Mr. Booth in the front here.
Yes, William Booth. I live at Queen Street in Bentley. Just two very quick more comments that you could put into a question if you want. You highlight choice, but you know, how will intellectually disabled people, like my daughter and her husband, make choices? You ask them a question, they just look at you. So who's going to make choices for them? My wife and I are 80. We're both in very poor health. I'm going in for a heart operation next week. Might not come out of it. And someone needs to be on her side. There's no other family. No other family. So that's a concern. The other thing is that 19 years ago, the City of Canning opened, with Homes West, a 7-unit project for intellectually disabled people. It's magnificent, it's wonderful, and the service that the City of Canning has provided twice daily, every morning, every evening, 7 days a week, for 19 years, they never missed a beat. I thought I'd hear some applause. I love the City of Canning, and I'm prepared to put my daughter's life in their hands. However, and all of this service hasn't cost her a cent. The government, through HACT or whatever, have paid for everything. And I read in this paper that you've passed out here, on 3 occasions, that the council may be required to fund costs through charging fees and charges and rates. So I certainly would be concerned about that, because obviously a disabled person's income is very low. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. They were good comments and not questions. But the aspect of choice, I think, particularly within disability, has probably the level of choice and consumer say in the way services are delivered has probably always been better in Western Australia than it has in aged care. Not so throughout Australia, but I think in Western Australia, and hopefully will provide that. In terms of the cost of services in the future for people without financial means, that's unlikely to change very much. Additional fees that come with the government changes are means-tested care fees, which means that if people have the income or they have the assets to be able to contribute towards their care services, they're going to be asked to do it. In Australia at the moment, for every retired Australian, there's 5 taxpayers. Over the next 2 decades, that drops to about 2.7. And what it means is we've got half the number of taxpayers to look after a growing number of older people, and there will be additional costs associated with providing the services. That's inevitable. NDIS, disability funding, particularly people in financial disadvantage, is unlikely to change because they don't have the capacity to be able to pay. I think the comment in the letter regarding fees and charges are likely to be around the concept, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tanya, but the retirement village and the nursing home won't cost millions, they'll cost tens of millions to rebuild and redevelop, and that funding in the future will need to come from somewhere. I've been to the little village that your daughter lives in, and agree it's beautiful. It's unlikely to change or require major modification to that itself. But primarily the investment in the future will be around the retirement villages, the nursing home, and the improvement of the home care services to meet the future.
My name is Audrey McCarthy and I live in Kilman Road. I'm 81 and I just have a service. But what happens if I'm given so much money and that money runs out? Who pays for my service? And will the people who do it now, will they still be doing it, or do I have to employ somebody to come and do that service?
Yeah. So Audrey, if a person that's receiving services has the ability to be able to contribute towards the cost of those services, then that will be required if they have the money to do it. If they don't have the money to do it, then the state and the Commonwealth generally subsidises that care, so that if you don't have it, you'll be subsidised. So in terms of the services that are being delivered to you, the actual people who provide the support to you change naturally as we change jobs and employment. It depends on the way forward, but ordinarily the people actually doing the handling of the care services under these three options are unlikely to change.
My name's Gay Chambers and I live in Noongar Way. Just listening to what you're saying, obviously Canning City Council would be a lot better off, and me as a ratepayer, if we didn't have to have all the cost of redeveloping things, and also having the cost of the HAC programs as part of the council services. As far as I can tell, the option would be just to hand over to private enterprise and the council get out of providing what they're already doing. Is that right?
It's an option, and it really depends upon the council's preference for whether they want to retain control of those services because they think they'll be able to do it well in the future, or whether or not they want someone external to provide the services. All I can say is that to have those services in the area is fantastic. I think the best option is the one that the council believes will invigorate those services so they're not only good but they become great and make sure that we can look after more people who need them in the future.
I'm Margaret Adams. I live in Wisteria Way, Ferndale, and mine are just comments, they're not questions. We all know that this city gives the best practice to its residents and also outside services. That was a fact. It was highlighted during the failed amalgamation fiasco. And they are to be applauded for the work that they put in. It seems to me that these options are skewed to the handing over to outside organisations. I fear in this society, if you watch television, the ads, etc., it's all fear-based. You know, funeral insurance, death insurance, this, that and the other. You're going to lose your homes, all this sort of thing. And I think the sad part is that the aged, and I'm one of them now, everybody, we've all paid our taxes, and we paid our taxes and expected to be looked after in the future. And all this uncertainty about possibly and maybe doesn't do older people any good. We've paid our money, we've paid our dues, and it's not our fault that the government doesn't have a bucket, let alone any money to put it in. Thank you.
Bernard Taylor's my name. I'm a resident of Rossmoyne Retirement Village. Generally, we're very happy with the services provided in the village, but myself and my wife are the youngest couple in the village. We've been there 2 years, and cost was one of the main factors involved in coming there, plus location and all these other things. But with the improvements that are necessary in there are going to cost a lot of money and will increase the value of our asset in the village. But if we're getting an increase in the value of the asset, do we have to contribute to the cost of that? Or where do we finish up down the line when we have to move on? And have we got to pay to get that better value that we have?
Yeah, thanks Bernard. And so residents in any retirement village, in non-rental retirement village in Western Australia are protected under the Retirement Villages Act of WA, which makes sure that the residents that are in there are guaranteed tenure so that they are able to stay. What normally happens in a redevelopment program, whether it's 5 or 10 or 15 years down the track, is that the organisation will generally, that is operating the village, will generally look to develop the areas of the village that are not being used. They'll create improvements in that area, and they'll either encourage residents, if they like the improvements, to move across, or you remain where you are. But they don't ask existing residents to contribute to the cost of the village. You've already paid your entry contribution, and you have a right to that unit that you're in.
Hi, my name is Blair and I live in Gold Coast, Shelley. I've just inherited an auntie because she doesn't have any children. She's in Canning Lodge. If you are hypothetically going to redevelop that, where do they go? And what happens to the staff who they are just now? Well, she's got dementia and she's starting to click with them. It's only been since December. But yeah, what happens to them? Where they move to, and what's the disruption with them and the staff?
Ordinarily with the redevelopment, there's a couple of approaches to it. One is that the home stops admitting new residents, particularly in cluster housing, because Canning Lodge, like a lot of the homes that were built in the 80s and 90s, are built in a cluster design, which enables you to provide separate accommodation. In a cluster redevelopment, sometimes the redevelopment will start in an empty house and will be built progressively over time. Most organisations will stop admitting new residents. On average in Australia, people stay about 2.5 years in a nursing home, and that's coming down all the time. So ordinarily in a redevelopment, they'll stop admitting new residents, and as the houses become available, they'll start a redevelopment program. Larger organisations that have lots of nursing homes in the area might offer the accommodation in better accommodation or closer nursing homes or residential aged care facilities that allow the people to move into areas that are more attuned to their needs, especially in the case of your auntie. If they have behavioural or dementia challenges, then they need to find accommodation that's as good or better than what she's receiving at the moment. What happens with staff? Often if the nursing home is in an organisation that just has one nursing home, sometimes because it takes probably about 18 months to rebuild the nursing home, so they won't work from home for that 18 months. Quite often they'll look to find other employment. With large organisations with multiple sites, they're normally redeployed to the other sites. They may come back when the new nursing home is built. But in an organisation that only has one nursing home, generally they'll seek other employment.
My name's Pat Coffey. I'm in Tribute Street in Shelley. I've got a vested interest. My 93-year-old mother is in Canning Lodge, and I think the facilities are absolutely fantastic. The staff are the most committed of any group of staff in the city of Canning. I know it's a big statement, but I've made it. We've got friends that have got mother or father in other city-related care facilities, outsourced. Quality is pretty ordinary. And I've got a real concern going forward, particularly the way the whole thing's been structured. It's really been skewed. Restructuring and redevelopment is going to cost tens of millions. And I'd want to argue with that quite vehemently. I think if only one of the sets of houses in Canning Lodge was set aside for high care, and the other ones are quite okay, that's not going to cost tens of millions. Option 3, rejuvenate and expand in partnership with someone else. If your figures are right, it's still going to cost tens of millions, which will then leave to flog it off. And there's only 42 people there. If it came to a vote, certainly it's going to be why spend tens of millions on such a small facility. And I think it comes down to, over the years, City of Canning hasn't had the greatest record. Now that they've changed, their record is absolutely fantastic, and I'm really quite proud to say I'm in the City of Canning. whereas 5 or 7 years ago, I'm not too sure I would have been putting my hand up. It comes down to the morality of it and the social aspect of the city. And to me, the tens of millions, and again, I'd argue with that, it shouldn't have anything to do with the money. It should come down to the morality that we've got an organisation at Canning Lodge that's working really, really well. The amount of unpaid overtime those guys do in external activities for those, it's really a family. I'd be devastated if the City of Canning take the easy option, sell it off. The majority of the ratepayers will say, yeah, do that, because they're young. I think we just got to take a deep breath and say, the three options, as they've been put, there's only one option that really can carry through, and that's sell it off, and I think it's skewed.
Thank you, Pat. You've raised a number of good points, and I'll take them in the order you made them. First of all, our findings were consistent with yours, is that we think Canning Lodge provides a fantastic service. The staff are not only dedicated, but they're multi-skilled, which you don't always get. Because of the small houses, they have to do multiple services, which is not often, or quite often, not the way that it's done. And so, yes, I agree with your observation there. But the moral or the functional aspect issue associated with that home is that it won't meet the needs of consumers in the future, and it is too small. It's 42 beds and it's built for people with lower levels of care. Just calling one of the house a high care house doesn't make it a high care house. It's not built for people with higher levels of care needs and with mobility issues. It will find it very, very difficult to look after people as they become very frail. And about 80% of people that are admitted into nursing homes today are very frail. It is a fantastic site, and it has the capacity to provide high care services, which will be the areas that are most in need in the future. Secondly, in terms of the skewing of the options, we developed the options with no prompting from anyone within the council. The only prompting that we had was that it was the best outcomes for the customers, the older customers in the future. And flogging it off, as you point to, is not one of the options that we'll put forward. The recommendations that we have made and the options that have been put forward are primarily around what can be achieved and what the consumers of the future, what the older customers of the future will need.
Hi, I'm Gerda Banks. I live at Riverton Drive in Shelley, but I'm also a discharge coordinator for the South Perth Hospital. So I deal a lot with elderly patients, and a lot of the patients come from the City of Canning, and that's okay. I can't judge so much about the residential facilities, but I do have a lot of concerns about the home care packages. At the moment, I don't know if you're aware of that, the health department's lost a lot of staff in the ACAT team, so right now I cannot get people ACATed in hospital, and without an ACAT, as you all know, aged care assessment, you cannot access these home care packages. So that's a real concern. That's not going to get better in the future. So what happens is a lot of our patients have to start paying for private services, which at minimum cost $45 an hour to have somebody come to your house. And in the weekends, it's double the rate. So it's horrendous. So the people who need to leave hospital that cannot get home care packages, from me as a discharge coordinator, the HAC services are the lifeline for these people. And I'm going to write a recommendation about that. The HAC services are fantastic. They have a low threshold, it's easy for people to get into, it's cheap relatively, much, much cheaper than the home care packages, it's local, it can be implemented really quickly. People love it, even if they have to wait for the professional home care packages to kick in later, they're really happy with that. So I would really, really urge you not to give up those HAC services too quickly and hand them over to a big private organisation. Now, I deal a lot with private service providers as well.
They're all very willing and very professional people, but a lot of the money is gobbled up by administration and bureaucracy. So what the lady in France said, and I'm not being negative here, I'm just warning everybody here, before you hand it over to big organizations, think about it. Like the lady in the front said, if your money is finished, you maybe get 6 hours of help at home, and the rest of your money is gobbled up by administration, and rightly so maybe, but what happens then? Then you have to start paying private people again. Now that's fine if you can afford that, but what if you're on a Centrelink pension and can't afford that? So these are comments, but the question is, are you aware that people cannot get ACATs at the moment? They are on waiting lists for 3 months. So the HAC services are their only lifeline. So just think of all these bureaucracy things as well before you give away the HAC services of the council. Okay, sorry.
Yes, so just in answer to your question, yes, I am aware. Packages, particularly level 1 and 2 Commonwealth packages, the demand for them is coming down, and part of that is not just being able to get ACAT'd, but the referral process. So HAC is a lot in demand, and at least part of that as well is that the means testing of HAC is almost non-existent compared to the Commonwealth funded packages. I would add that it's all going to move on to that system in the future anyway. And the one thing that I just would caution about bureaucracy and administration costs is that the city is not doing this efficiently.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am going to have to cut this off, unfortunately, in possibly 10 minutes, and then conclude the presentation, but I will tell you about how you can make some feedback to this.
Right. My name is Margaret Murray. I come from Rostrata Avenue in Willerton, and I'd like to second what the coordinator said from Royal Perth. I was employed by a charity to work with disabled kids, so I know exactly what's going on. And I would absolutely say, do not, under any circumstance, go with private charity or religious body, because the money is not for the people it's supposed to be for. And I think the best thing that can happen is that you are responsible for your own budget. At least it cuts out the people that are only in it for the money. And I think you have to be very careful, no matter how good it sounds.
Diane Matthews from Bridget Place in Shilling, and that brings me to my question rather nicely, because I was concerned about the management of the budgets and how that was going to be managed and assisted into the community, and are there going to be guidelines and priorities set on how it ought to be managed so that we all know whether or not a provider is doing the correct thing?
Yes, so the provider would work with the customer to go through their budgets and agree on a program for the services that would be provided to them. So that the actual provider of the services would work through with the customer, with the user. Yeah, so they're accredited to work within guidelines, and there are care standards that they have to adhere to. They also have to tell you about their overhead costs too. So you get an opportunity to see how much of the costs are going into actual care hours and how much of their resources are going into administration, into the unit, which was the comment raised before about the amount of money goes to running the organisation compared to what you actually get. Because you want, obviously, as much as possible actual contact hours and care hours. And ideally that operator can do it as efficiently as possible. And also you want a diversity of services potentially as well. So the services are not only giving you maximum contact time, but also by the right people.
Hello. My name is Margaret Jones. I'm here not for myself, but it goes back to what the lady up there said about budgets and what this gentleman said here about choice. Now, this letter came to a person. Here are the account details for direct debit for the City of Canning. Please ensure the payments for direct debit with the bank are set up for every 4 weeks, as an invoice shall be sent out every 4 weeks. And it's signed by Libby Ingerson. And what we have, what came with it, is what you're talking about. Now, this person that was sent to cannot make the decisions about who he wants to deliver his services, in the same way as this gentleman here at the beginning asked the question, and I think you did not really answer it. And so this comes out. I do understand now how the change has been made, consumer-directed care, but it's a big assumption on the part of government to think that everyone who needs the services will be able to say, oh, I wouldn't like you, but I'd like you to deliver my services.
Yeah, so I didn't answer the question because that is law, so that's the way that it will operate from here. So I'm not here to argue for the way that the government is going to manage it in the future. It's just the way that it's going to happen. The question is around whether the city decides to run that program itself or in partnership with others.
Yes, however, it still doesn't seem to assure people. I mean, if people have a family, then I guess the family can help the person to make a choice. However, it may be that then the person has to pay an advocate. And the other thing is I'd like to ask is, when was this commissioned? Was this commissioned before we had a new council or since then?
I'm sorry, when there was the review commission?
Yes, yes.
November last year.
Since the new council?
The council came on board in October.
Okay, so that's...
Sorry, can I just say though that there was a budgeted figure to undertake that review before the council came on.
I didn't hear, I'm sorry.
Sorry. There was a budgeted figure on the city's budget before the council came on board to undertake a review, because staff working in the area of aged care and disability had started to hear about the changes coming.
And also, if I may, you mentioned you had feedback from some people. So who are the people who you consulted with?
And so the city ordinarily goes through and gets feedback from staff, residents and families and volunteers as part of its ongoing operations, and so we were able to have a look at that. We also visited all of the sites. We spoke to people who were receiving services, people that were in management positions and staff as well.
Okay, all right.
Thank you. So we'll have our last question after that here, please. Sorry, you can talk to me.
My name's Madeline and I live in Barbican Street, East Shelley. It's a selfish question, but we've had gardeners for a number of years and they're very good. What, are they just going to lose their jobs, or can we still get them to come?
Yes, so ordinarily, no matter what decision that the council makes, if you're in partnership with another organisation or if you're operating themselves, the people that are delivering the services are usually continue to be engaged, and so they don't normally change.
It's not the changing, I just think to be made redundant.
If I could just say that one of the points that Cam made at the beginning of his presentation was that Australia has a very Asian population. It's just increasing all the time, and in the city of Canning it's going to increase. So my personal opinion is I would be expecting to see more services, not a decrease in service delivery. Especially things like home and garden maintenance, domestic assistance, personal care, transport. We're always going to need that, and probably more of it into the future. Thank you, Cam, very much. Please give Cam a round of applause. And I'll just just, ladies and gentlemen, I haven't quite finished, sorry to bore you, but I'll just finish. So again, the proposed timeline, we're having another community briefing which will be run exactly the same way as we did today on Saturday the 21st of May. Feedback will be received up until 4 on the 17th of June. We're hoping to put a report to Council in 2016 with the feedback that you've provided and any recommendations for the Council to consider. Information will be available, a copy of the presentation today to take away. It's on the back there if you haven't got it. Tomorrow a video of this forum will be on the City's website. The presentation will also be on the City's video of the forum, and the presentation will be on the City's website as well. Monday the 23rd of May, the forum video will be available on the website, so that's Saturday's forum. So please, your feedback is encouraged, and I'm sorry I had to cut you off a little bit early today, but please, I encourage you to give any feedback you'd like to give. Tell us your thoughts about the review and your preference for your future care. There's our email address. We've set up a special email, reviewfeedback@canning.wa.gov.au, or by mail, locked bag 80, Welshpool WA 6986. You can come into the council in person and speak to one of the project team that I introduced earlier, and or by 4 p.m. on the 17th of June, please. For any information or questions, if you have queries, please feel free to contact either myself or Lisa Bradley, our Manager of Comms and Marketing. Our details are in the presentation. If you ring the City, you'll be able to be put straight through to us via phone if that's your preference. Got anything else? That's it. So thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much for your feedback. And there's a cup of tea and coffee and biggies at the back of the room.